When I try to warn people about what's going on in Myanmar in Southeast Asia, it's not because I'm making some guess on what's happening. I have been researching, writing about, and trying to warn the world about what was happening in Myanmar with these US-backed opposition groups since as far back as 2011. This is an article from 2011, West grinds development to a halt in Myanmar. And this was about a dam project between the then military-led Myanmar government and the Chinese government. This was going to bring in development, infrastructure, electricity, and all of these opposition groups crawled out from under their rocks to oppose it and stop the project. And they did it through a combination of media campaigns, political campaigns, protests, and even armed attacks on the crews building the project. So I went through who all of these groups were. International Rivers, funded by Open Society, Tides Foundation, the Ford Foundation. There's all of these local, supposedly grassroots organizations like Kachin Development Networking Group, funded by the US government through the National Endowment for Democracy. And then there were all of these media organizations, which I've talked about many times now in my videos about Myanmar. Irrawaddy, Democratic Voice of Burma, Myanmar, all of them are funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, and I've provided the evidence of this since as early as 2011. And they used all kinds of gimmicks, human rights concerns. This is Kachin Environmental Organization, so they were using environmental concerns, and all of it was just to derail China's development of the region and the benefits that nations like Myanmar would receive from that development. And I mentioned about Aung San Suu Kyi, whose support network was also involved in protesting this dam. So people who imagine that somehow she changed her mind and she wanted to work with China, it doesn't matter, because her entire political network was created by the US, is funded to this day by the US, and they will never change their mind about wanting to do business with China. Then in this 2018 article, it's titled, Militants Threaten China's One Belt, One Road Initiative in Myanmar. This was 2018. And again, I'm warning about these ethnic rebel groups, these groups armed with war weapons. Look in this picture. These aren't peaceful protesters. They have war weapons, and they are fighting a low-intensity war with Myanmar's central government. I go through how these groups were also involved in protesting all of these development projects. And you can see the protesters right here. All their signs are in English. Stop damming in Kachin land. And I show how all of these groups are funded by the US government. And then there's this WikiLeaks cable from the US State Department, and it's titled Burma Grassroots Opposition to Chinese-Backed Dam in Northern Burma. And in the cable, they admit that these groups were receiving US Embassy small grants. So they're not grassroots organizations at all. They're funded by the US government, and the US government, their interest in this is to stop development in Myanmar, to stop China from helping develop Myanmar, to keep the country divided and weak, to keep it a crisis, a dead weight around China's neck. That's what all of this is about. And then I go into the history of these armed ethnic groups. It goes all the way back to World War II, and actually it goes all the way back to British colonial rule before that. And my source is not the Myanmar's military saying this about their opponents. My source is the Irrawaddy, which is funded by the US government. So this is the US-backed opposition saying this about themselves and their own history and the history of adjacent groups working with them. And so memories of World War II run deep for KIO, Kachin Independence Organization. And they talk about how the Kachin, along with the Karen and Chin, and these are names you're going to be hearing very often now because they've took up arms and they've linked up with the US-backed protesters in Myanmar, and they're going to do to Myanmar what they did to Libya. They're going to create a united army. They have a parallel government. The US is going to back both of them, and they're going to burn the whole country to the ground. And they admit that they comprise the overwhelming majority of local troops who served in Britain's Burmese colonial army. In contrast, Burma's colonial army had few, if any, members of the Burman majority, a deliberate policy of divide and rule whose legacy is still felt in the country today. Absolutely. The US and the British to this day pour millions and millions of dollars into these ethnic groups, the fake NGOs supporting the armed groups, to deliberately keep the country divided. And this is all an effort to reassert Western influence over the country, or to at the very least prevent the country from aiding in China's ascent. So I'm trying to warn people, I didn't just guess about what's happening in Myanmar based on a few news stories that I saw recently. I have been researching and writing about Myanmar for a decade now. So I hope people go through both of these articles. There's a lot of links in these articles, and they go back to sources from the opposition themselves and from the US government and from the Western media. This is not Russian media or Chinese media. These are sources that are going to be very hard for a skeptic to argue against if they're inclined to believe Western narratives in the first place. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share it. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description for the links to these articles, as well as to ways you can help support my work so that I can continue making videos like this. And as always, thank you for watching.